Hello, how you doing? It's Phil Thatch, and I can't believe it, but they really did it. I came on here a week ago today and made a video about how Canon was about to announce the 200 to 800 f6.3 to f9 lens, and this was all based on rumors that I had seen all over the internet, mainly on Canon rumors, but other sources as well. And for the longest time, I didn't think they were really going to do it, and then in the week or so leading up to the actual announcement date, I started to actually believe it. And you know, I had contacted my salesperson at my camera store and said, hey, put me on the list for this lens that doesn't even exist. And they trusted me and put me on the list. And sure enough, it actually happened. They did it. I kind of thought that I might have to call my salesperson and say, hey, I'm sorry I had you put me on the list for something that doesn't exist, and it didn't get announced, but it did. And now, you know, some of the bigger YouTube channels and reviewers, they actually get sent advanced copies of lenses like this. They don't get to do a review, they get to do what's called a preview. And I've watched every single one of those. And here's what I have to say about this lens and its specifications. First of all, I think the lens is beautiful to look at. It's not as attractive when it's zoomed out because you've got a slimmer tube, and then it's like this 100 to 500 just has a small area that's larger at the end, but the 200 to 800 has an area that's larger at the end that's, it's hard to say how long it is, but it's probably at least 2 inches and maybe as long as 4 inches. So when it's zoomed out, it's kind of ugly, but who cares? When it's zoomed all the way in, the lens I think is absolutely beautiful. The next thing is, of course, the price. It did turn out to be $18.99, which is what the rumors were saying it was going to be. The rumors that were really close to announcement time, they said it was going to be $18.99, and that's what it is, and that is fantastic. And of course, at that price, the earlier rumors said it was going to be somewhere between $2,000 and $2,200 US, but it ended up being $18.99, and at any of those prices, we're not going to see a red ring. It's not going to be an L series lens at that price point. But pleasantly surprising, it does have some weather sealing, not as much as an L series lens would have, but it does have some weather sealing. And I think that's fantastic because, like I mentioned in the video that came out last week, if it comes a downpour, I'm not going to stay out and continue shooting anyway. But this lens with its mild weather sealing should be able to handle a sprinkle. And if it sprinkles, you know, enough to get you wet but not soaked, I will probably continue shooting. So it's nice to know that this lens can probably handle that. Another area of concern was how much is this thing going to weigh? And I've got a cheat sheet over here with all the weights and I will refer to it. It's going to be 4.5 pounds, which 4.5 pounds for 800 millimeters is not bad. Let's compare it to some other stuff. The old Nikon 200 to 500 that I shot with forever is 5.07 pounds. So it's over half a pound lighter than this lens. And I've considered this lens to be pretty light at the time because the lens that I was shooting with before that weighed like 11 pounds. It was that 500 f4 I talked about in the last video. The Sony, which has been around a little while, weighs 4.65 pounds. So this 200 to 600 millimeter lens, although it is faster, 6.3, 5.6 to 6.3, it weighs more than the new 200 to 800 that's about to come out. 4.65 pounds versus 4.5 for the 200 to 800. This Nikon lens, the 180 to 600, which is also a 5.6 to 6.3, it's much newer than the Sony, which has been out for a while. This has only been out just a month or 2, 3, something like that. It's a little bit lighter than the 4.5 pound 200 to 800. It comes in at 4.3 pounds. But you got 0.2 of a pound less weight and 200 millimeters less focal length. But again, it is faster. It's 6.3 on the long end, and the 200 to 800 is f9 on the long end. And of course, the 100 to 500, it's really a different class of lens. This is kind of a premium 100 to 400 lens, but Canon added 500 millimeters for their RF version. It's super light at 3 pounds even. But this lens, the 800 millimeter f11 prime lens from Canon, comes in at 2.77 pounds. So even though it's 800 millimeters, It's lighter than this 100 to 500 and it's only 3 pounds. But if what you're looking for is lightweight, if that is your most important feature, it's going to be hard to beat the budget RF 100 to 400. It's a 5.6 to f8, and this little lens is only 1.4 pounds. The next area that was of concern with this lens is minimum focus distance. And you know, big telephoto lenses have historically had long minimum focus distances. And sometimes you can get really close to a bird that's really small, and if you've got a good minimum focus distance and a large focal length, you can fill the frame with a really, really small bird. So that is nice. But that was a Achilles heel of this lens, this 800 f11 lens, because its minimum focus distance was nearly 20 feet. The exact figure is 19.69 feet with this lens. And the other lenses that this thing is really in competition with, the Sony and the Nikon 200 to 600, their minimum focus distance is 7.87 feet for the Sony and a really close 4.27 feet for this Nikon. Now, I'm not sure if those minimum focus distances are at all the way at 600 millimeters or if they're somewhere in between. And it's interesting because this 800 millimeter lens has a really close minimum focus distance at 200 millimeters. It's only 2.6 feet at 200 millimeters, but if you're all the way out at 800 millimeters, the minimum focus distance is 10.8 feet, which is still much better than the nearly 20 feet of this lens. It almost cuts it in half. And when I was using this as my main bird lens, when I was shooting with the R6 and this lens for a while I was waiting for the R7 APS-C camera to come out, most of the time I did not have to back up, but every once in a while I had to back up when I was using this lens, and that was kind of a pain. But I think with the 200 to 800, the times I'll have to back up will be few and far between. And because the minimum focus distance on this 200 to 800 is 2.6 feet at 200 millimeters and 10.8 feet at 800 millimeters, if I'm so close to the bird I'm trying to get in focus that I need to back up, I can probably also just zoom back a little bit, maybe even to 600 millimeters, and then get it in focus. One time I was out with this lens, the 100 to 500, and its best focus distance for maximum magnification is right around 300 millimeters. I was doing some bird photography in this huge dragonfly, or no, it was a horsefly. It flew in and it landed on the dashboard of the car. And I tried to make a photograph of it because I was in the driver's seat with the lens, and I pointed the camera at it at 500 millimeters and it wouldn't focus on it. And I eased it back to about 300, and even though it was just on the dashboard of the car at 300 millimeters, this lens would focus on it. So the minimum focus distance on a lot of lenses is closer at when you're zoomed all the way wide and further away when you're zoomed all the way long. And that's the case for this lens. So I think even though it is 10.8 feet at the 800 millimeter lens, you'll probably be able to zoom it back to 700 or 600 millimeters and get it much closer than that. Another thing to think about with a lens that's 800 millimeters is how storable is it? How easy is it going to be to carry? And of course, another leader in that area is this lens, this 100 to 500, because it's an external zoom and it grows as the focal length increases. It also shrinks as it decreases, and you can store this thing easily. I carry this in my 200 series low pro backpack, no problem. Of all these lenses, the easiest one to store is this Canon 100 to 500. It is only 6.5 inches long. So it'll store in very small places in your bag. The 100 to 500 is 8.2 inches long. My old 200 to 500 that I worked with forever is 10.53 inches, but if you're using it on a mirrorless camera, you have to also add an inch or so for the FTZ adapter. That 200 to 500 that I just showed you will fit in my 300 series low pro bag, and so will this, the 800 f11, which is 800 millimeters, but it collapses down and loses about 3.5 or so inches of its working use when it's in storage mode. it collapses down to 11.1 inches and does fit in my 300 series bag. The new Nikon 180 to 600 is an internal zoom. Its size does not change as you zoom it, but it is 12.4 inches long. It will barely squeeze into my 300 series bag, but I really don't like to put it in there because if you have a body on there, you kind of have to smash it in there. 12.4. The new 200 to 800, of course, it's an external zoom, so its size will change. But when you zoom it all the way down to its smallest size, it's 12.4 inches, the same size as this. So it could probably squeeze into my 300 series bag. It certainly won't fit in my 200 series bag like this 100 to 500 will. Of all my lenses, the most difficult one to store currently is this Sony 200 to 600. It's 12.52 inches, and that's only 0.12 inches longer than the 200 to 800 or this Nikon 180 to 600. But I find that just that little extra, it's like 1/8 of an inch. I can't quite squish it into my 300 series bag like I can this lens, and I'm assuming I will be able to the new 200 to 800. So it looks like any worries about it having too much weight are not true. 4.5 pounds is not bad, especially for 800 millimeters, though it is heavier than this incredibly light thing. The worries about minimum focus distance seem to also be unfounded. I believe that it will be perfectly usable, the 10.8 feet at 800 millimeters and even less at shorter focal lengths. And it seems like compared to what I would consider its main competition, these two lenses, the 180 to 600 from Nikon and the 200 to 600 from Sony, it seems like it's going to store in about the same amount of space. There's some worry about the f9 aperture on the long end of this lens, but compared to the 800 millimeter f11, it's pretty fast. That's 2/3 of a stop faster than this. And using a full frame camera, I used this as my main bird lens for about a year and really enjoyed it. So being able to have that same focal length and 2/3 of a stop faster aperture and a better minimum focus distance and the ability to zoom if something is larger, if I'm too close to get it in the frame at 800 millimeters, the ability to also zoom is going to be a really big plus. I think perhaps my biggest concern about the 200 to 800 Canon lens is it's an external zoom, and not that it's an external zoom, it's that external zooms typically have a longer throw to move the zoom. For example, right here I am with the 200 to 500 external zoom. Watch how far I have to turn this. 200, 500. Long, 200, 500, 200, 500. Now, let's take a look at an internal zoom lens. This is the Sony 200 to 600, 200, 600, 200, 600. Not far at all. Fantastic. How about the new Nikon internal zoom? 180, 600, 180, 600. Huh. Okay, well, this 100 to 500 Canon lens is the most expensive lens out here. It's an external zoom though. Let's see. 100, 500, 100, 500. So these external zoom lenses appear to all have a longer zoom throw than the internal zoom lenses. And this 200 to 800, it has to zoom the furthest. It has to go all the way from 200 to 800, that's 600 millimeters. That's further than any of these zooms. We'll see. I don't think it's going to be a huge problem for me, but I think some people might complain that it could be a quicker and shorter throw to do the entire zoom range. So that's a legitimate concern about this lens. Another thing I'm excited about with this lens, my best autofocusing camera in terms of tracking birds in flight is my full frame R6 Mark II. I just love that camera. I'm using it right now, as a matter of fact, with the 14 to 30 ultra wide to make this video, so I can't show it to you in my hands. But I'm excited about having 800 millimeters on that camera, because when I use this lens on the 500 end multiplied times the 1.6 crop on my APS-C R7, it's 800 millimeters full frame equivalent. but the camera doesn't focus as well. It focuses very well, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't focus as well as my R6 Mark II. So to have actual 800 millimeters and a zoom and a reasonable minimum focus distance on my best autofocusing camera, I'm pretty excited about that combination. I think for birds in flight, I will probably shift to using my R6 Mark II and this new 200-800 lens. That'll be my birds in flight combo for sure. Well, almost for sure. I'll have to try it and see how it works, but I'm thinking it's going to be great because last year, around this time last year, I went to the Hiawassee Wildlife Refuge with the R6 Mark II and this lens, the 800 f11, and I photographed sandhill cranes in flight up there, and this lens and that camera, the R6 Mark II, did great. I did one shot, I may be able to put a link to it in the top of the screen. I did one full buffer. Actually, it wasn't even a full buffer. I never even hit the buffer. And I was using the medium speed on that camera. The medium speed is 20 frames per second. The fastest is 40 frames per second, but I was using the middle because I think 20 is plenty. And I made a shot of sandhill crane going all the way across the sky. Just held it wide open, and every shot was in focus. I only stopped shooting. I didn't hit the buffer. I only stopped shooting because the bird flew behind a tree. So there's no sense shooting when you can't see the bird. But anyway, the R6 Mark II on this new lens may be really special. And the R5 and the R3 full frame cameras work pretty well for birds when you have 800 millimeters. It could start shipping as early as December the 14th, and if that is the day that it ships, I'll probably receive mine on the 15th, which is a Friday, and I should have a video out the Monday after that with some bird photography, just to see how it goes. So I'm really looking forward to that. Very excited about this lens. What a groundbreaking lens this is going to be, and I can't wait to share it with you and compare it with all these other lenses to see how it does. Thanks for watching. Give me a thumbs up if you like the content, subscribe, hit the bell, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye.